My community of creative people is not being served well by this kind of information and treatment, and I can do it better.
For so many self-employed creators and entrepreneurs, tax season feels like chaos. Confusing rules, fear of mistakes, and the nagging sense that money was never meant to be this stressful. But imagine a world where taxes actually empower you to live your purpose. That's exactly what today's guest, Hannah Cole, makes possible. A working artist turned tax expert, Hannah founded Sunlight Tax to help creative, mission-driven professionals transform financial confusion into clarity and confidence. Through her Money Bootcamp, top-rated Sunlight Tax podcast, and her new book, Taxes for Humans, she's proving that when you understand your money, you can change your life and even the world. I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the 𝘏𝘏 Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of 𝘏𝘏 Financial. Let's dive into the show. Well, I am super excited today. We have Hannah Cole, a tax expert, and who doesn't love taxes? I mean, it affects us all. So we'll be spending a lot of time on taxes, but welcome to the show, Hannah.
Thanks so much, Larry. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So listen, we're going to dive into and spend a great deal of time today on what you're doing today within your tax work. But before we do that, can you share with our listeners, they're always interested in the entrepreneurial journey. What was your entrepreneurial journey? What led you up to the point of, being a tax expert?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a total weirdo. I'm a professional painter. So I've got my MFA in painting, in art school, and I'm still a painter, still working at that. But basically, I had such humiliating experiences working with my dad's accountant. And I also got answers that didn't feel right, especially about whether my art was a hobby or a business. And I just did not trust or believe what I was being told. And so ultimately, it sent me back to school for accounting. I was just like, my community of creative people is not being served well by this kind of information and treatment, and I can do it better. So that was my journey.
So was your dad an entrepreneur? Is that something that's kind of been ingrained in you throughout, or no?
I would say not at all. I mean, my parents are both professionals, but no. My father, I would say that he's an architect and he had to figure out the business side of running a creative operation. So I do feel like there's some insight I've had from that. My mother's a doctor. She never had the slightest interest in entrepreneurship, so didn't get it from her.
So you're breaking the mold. You're a first generation entrepreneur, it sounds like.
I would say so, for sure.
So, listen, this was a huge undertaking for you to kind of pivot or add on to what you're currently doing in being an artist and then going back to school to kind of learn taxes. Was it as simple as not being able to get the answers that you wanted, or, was it a combination of that as well as, wanting to also help others in your position, or was it really something else? What really motivated you to become a tax professional? Because it's clearly a 180-degree pivot from being an artist, I think.
It definitely is. Although we all need to do our taxes, including artists. I think I saw something, and I think people in your audience will relate to this. I just saw a need that was going unaddressed. I have this community. Artists don't go to work in in an office every day. They're often solitary. And so we are huge community builders. And we share resources with each other. And I had asked everyone I know if there was a good tax person, and no one had one. So it was just like a really organic need that I myself felt and knew that my community had. And I just spotted it. And I thought, I am trained in speaking to people with empathy and understanding the value of what they do. And the accountants I'm speaking to do not have that skill. And I think I can bring this skill to this area if I learn it, of taxes, and help people who are creative, people who feel sort of unseen by this industry. I can help those people kind of feel included and be able to access this information. So that was really what it was, like spotting a need.
Why do you think there's this feeling of being unseen, by the accounting profession? Because I tend to agree with you, because we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but we work with a lot of authors, and I feel like, they've kind of expressed similar things to us, not understanding, not really being there. So, what was it for you, and why do you think this is?
Yeah, I think it's fear. If you look at the kind of person who goes to study accounting and you look at the kind of person who goes to study art, these are about as opposite of a personality type as you could possibly get. I mean, one of them is doing something incredibly risky and bold and where they're going to be a weirdo and they're going to stand out like a sore thumb. And the other person is trying to not stand out at all, kind of blend into the woodwork, do something very sort of where the path is very prescribed. I mean, they're just really opposites. And so I think a lot of accountants, and it's not because they're bad people, truly, I just think they have absolutely no understanding of what an artist is like as a person or is doing every day in their studio. They just do not know the culture at all.
One of the things you specialize in working with self-employed people, and what are your best maybe 2 or 3 tips for those that are self-employed when it comes to taxes and thinking about that?
Yeah. I think, first of all, having a separation between your business account and your personal account is probably the best thing everyone can do to just help their accounting be easier, their headaches be smaller.
Right.
So that's really important. And then it's only reinforced as you go up the food chain and your business grows. So if you go out and form an LLC, then the separation between your business and personal accounts becomes mandatory as opposed to optional. So it's just a good idea from day one. The other thing to be aware of is that your income when you are running a small business, just a solo business, is subject to self-employment tax. That's a key area where a lot of people, because we don't have a tax education in this country, which I think is a little bananas.
Yeah, I agree.
People don't know about self-employment tax a lot of times until they suddenly get a tax bill that is a bunch higher than they actually expected because they're only thinking about income tax. And so knowing that self-employment tax is 15.3% of your profit, and that's going to pay for your Medicare and Social Security, that's really important to factor in anytime you're doing those back of the envelope calculations about what you might owe. And then even on top of that, when you're doing those calculations, quarterly taxes are a thing. So if you have income from your business, even if it is sort of side hustle level, you need to be thinking about paying quarterly taxes when you are actually making enough to make a living on. Then quarterly taxes are mandatory, not optional. So that's an important thing to get your head around as a small business.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I can't impress upon people that separation of the business and personal is huge. Just having a separate credit card, a separate bank account, just putting everything separately, makes things a lot easier for you or whoever's doing your taxes, number one. And number two, it'll just make your life easier, especially come tax time when you have to sort out what's a business expense and what's a personal expense, because you could take a lot of time and effort and energy trying to sort that out at the 11th hour when taxes are owed. So,
oh my gosh. And I'm not coming from a position of superiority here. Like, I have been that person with a highlighter, like in the final moments, like, I think that trip to Home Depot, I think that was from my studio. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's so stressful. And when you have all your expenses coming out of the business account, you know that they're all business expenses. So it's just so much easier.
With all the bad advice out there, and there is a lot of bad advice out there, including, a crazy amount of misinformation swirling on TikTok, for example, how can people make sure that they're asking the right questions of the people, the professionals they decide to entrust their financial future to, whether it's an accountant or an advisor? Obviously you started asking some questions and you didn't feel comfortable with the answers, so you started looking in another direction. So how can people follow that lead and make sure they're asking the right questions to those professionals they're entrusting?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think, the number one thing that I have to say to people when you're looking for, a tax professional, a financial advisor, a wealth manager, do you feel respected? Are you being listened to? Because that to me is the absolute baseline that has to be there. And if it's not, and a lot of people don't feel that sense of respect or being listened to. If you don't, I think don't go with that person. That is rule number one to me. The second thing is that there is so much advice swirling around on the internet. And the thing is, even if that advice is accurate for a certain person, you might not be that person. right? So like I've seen on Instagram, I get served these ads, and I know a lot of others do. Like, you might save a whole lot of money if you form an S corp, right? So, and then I have clients who come to me having formed an S corp because they've seen these ads, and they're in New York State where S corps make no sense because New York State has a law that essentially taxes back all of the benefit of an S corporation. So that person would have really benefited by talking to somebody who could apply the rules to their specific situation and say, hey, yeah, an S corp might have saved you money if you lived in North Carolina, but in the state that you do live in, it doesn't save you any money, and in fact is now going to increase your accounting fees substantially.
Yeah, good point. Good points. Do you know finances can be joyful with your partner? We created a fantastic guide for couples to start their journey surrounding their finances. Head over to 𝘏𝘶𝘮𝑢𝑠/couplesjoy to download your free copy today. Don't miss out. Start bringing more joy into your financial conversations. One of the things I've heard you say also is you talk about tying your financial health to tax day, right? Tax filing deadline. How can people use tax day as a financial checkup of sorts?
Yeah. So one of the things that I really, to say had fun with is a little bit funny, but I did. I had fun. In my book, Taxes for Humans, I wrote a chapter about how to review your tax return because I really see that this is a skill that can give you tools to kind of evaluate where you stand and where things are changing for you in this upcoming year. And most of us don't ever get an education on how to review our tax return. So just like knowing a couple key numbers on your tax, summary can help you kind of have a baseline for like, what is my tax rate? What am I going to owe this year for quarterly taxes? Would a tax advantaged account help me save money on taxes? And the answer to that is pretty much yes. So I think, we live in a world where a lot of tax companies make their money by, a marketing message that teaches us to be fearful about taxes and to hate it and to want it to go away as quickly as possible because their interest is, hand over your money to me and we'll do it, right? But I think a little more just like patience and self-compassion about your own ability to, look at some numbers, just a couple numbers, is really helpful because just taking a look at a few key numbers, I'm not saying like go read the entire Internal Revenue Code. I'm just saying like if you learn like what these 5 numbers on your tax summary are showing you, you have a lot of power to make better decisions in the upcoming year. So,
what are a couple of those numbers that people should be looking at?
Sure. Well, a really good one is your total tax. So looking at what your total tax from the prior year was, that's a helpful number because your quarterly taxes for the upcoming year are actually based on that or can be based on that. It's also good to know that that is not absolutely set in stone. It's only a baseline for making an estimate. I think people don't realize how much estimation is happening in taxes and that the tax returns job is reconciling last year's estimates with the total actual numbers once you know them, which you can only know after December 31st, which is why we file 2025 taxes in 2026. So that's a really good thing to know, your total tax from the year before. What are some other ones? If you have, there's a line 37 is amount you owe. If that number, line 37 on your tax, it's on the signature page of your tax return if you're looking to find this. Line 37, amount you owe. If that number is greater than $1,000, it means you're required by law to be paying quarterly taxes this year. And a lot of people don't even know that. You can also see line 38, the line below that, is the penalty that you paid last year for not paying quarterly taxes, for not estimating and paying enough tax throughout the year. So if you see a penalty there, it means it's meant to be like, hey, hello, like,
right.
Get on top of this.
You missed this.
But when we are fearful of our taxes and don't look at them and just shove them in a drawer, which many people do, and I don't blame them, we don't see that and we don't know what it means. So those are things that can be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think what I'm also hearing, and we talk about this all the time with the families we serve, is, many times accountants or tax preparers or whoever are just trying to get the tax return done. And they're looking over their shoulder backwards to see what happened.
Yeah.
What you're talking about also is using the prior year's return to help you kind of project where things are going to be or should be for the coming year so that you could be better prepared for it. And it's not a surprise at the end of the year and a scramble, which I think is very helpful to many. So thank you for that.
And Larry, can I say another thing there?
Sure.
So it's also good to know that, one of the ways to pay your estimated quarterly taxes in the upcoming year is to base that on last year's total tax. Now, if you think about what assumption is being made there, the assumption is that this year's income will be very similar to last year's income. But you, the taxpayer, you, the client, you are the one who knows better than anybody else what this year is going to look like. So if you're planning to leave your day job and go all in on your, entrepreneurship, if your spouse just became unemployed, those kind of things are things
Sure.
So I want to give trust back to the person actually looking at their tax return, talking to a professional, because you actually have a lot of information, and that's important. The tax professional can only look at last year's numbers.
Right.
It's you who knows what's upcoming in your life.
Great points. Great points. You mentioned a couple minutes ago your book, Taxes for Humans, right? Tell us a little bit about what you hope that readers will take away from reading your book.
Thank you. I really felt like I see a need for a tax guide that just helps people do their taxes, learn how to review their taxes, make some decisions about things like paying estimates, but that has a sense of humor and that is really warm and encouraging. I just wanted to get away from that sort of shaming feeling that a lot of people, especially, authors, people doing creative work, we tend to feel sometimes just because of an offhand comment we may have heard one time in a, financial professional's office. So I just want people to have that feeling of like, oh, I'm much more capable than I realized. This isn't as terrible as I've been trained to believe it is. I can do this. That's really what I want people to feel.
Yeah, it's not really crazy. It's, once you have a framework for looking at it and understanding it, it's easy. And like you said, it's not like you have to go through the whole 30 or 40 or 50 page tax return to understand it, a couple of numbers, and you could be empowered to really glean a lot of, if not all the information you need. So
absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. So people should take a look, Taxes for Humans, and have better understanding. So, we've talked a little bit about hobbies. We've talked about, you've mentioned side hustles a couple of times. What advice do you have for somebody who's looking to potentially transition maybe from their side hustle or passion project to a full-time business? Is there's something they should, really be thinking about or need to know?
Yeah. First of all, if that's you, congratulations. It's a huge step. It can be a little scary, but it's really amazing. I think when you're doing that, it's a really good time to get yourself up to speed with how the tax side works, because when you have a small business, you're going to need to pay estimated quarterly taxes. You're going to need to do some bookkeeping because you want to be tracking those deductions in order to get all the tax advantage and tax savings you can out of running that business. So just getting a little bit more up to speed on those things, bookkeeping, quarterly taxes, keeping your tax records. Those things are going to really help you keep the taxes from becoming a stumbling block, which they don't need to. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, great points. We actually created, and I would imagine it's probably relevant, and you could probably apply it to artists also like yourself. We created an author guide for the authors that we serve, that just gives them an overview of things that they need to think about from a financial planning standpoint, finance, taxes, just general business, to make it easier for them. So I think that also is probably applicable to, probably the arts in general, or even just side hustle to full-time role, right? I mean, there are just certain things. I don't think it matters so much. Like Like we get a lot of questions sometimes from authors saying, hey, or thinking, well, I'm different because I'm an author. Now, they're different in the way they earn money. You're an artist, right, Hannah?
Yeah.
You're different in the way you earn money, but essentially a business is a business, right?
Yes, very much. Even though each business has its own lingo that we tend to use, and so it feels different. Yeah, I totally agree. Actually, can I share a resource with your people? Because
Sure,
I have a resource for authors. I have this visual guide to tax deductions, and I have 9 different versions of it, and I have one for writers specifically. But on my website at sunlighttax.com, if you go to the deductions guide tab, the writers in your audience can get this. And it's like a translation key. This is art school at work.
Okay.
Because I put down the way that artists and writers tend to speak about their deductions. They use specific language and they might be thinking of it in a certain mode. So I made a translator to show where that actually goes on their tax return, as what kind of classification it has to the IRS. So I think that this is really a helpful resource for any writers out there who are looking to make sure that their deductions are all getting captured.
Awesome. Well, be sure to send that over to us, and we'll definitely include it with the show notes.
Sure.
And we'll include the author guide. We wrote the author guide in their lingo also, so it was very easy for them to understand and make sure that it was very much aligned with them as well for those same reasons. So
I love it. Actually, if you'd be willing to send me the link to your author
Of
guide,
course.
I would love
I'd be
to
happy
share
to.
it with my audience as well, because I also serve a lot of authors, and I think they would love to see that.
I would be happy to. And,
Yeah.
it's been a pleasure having you on, and we're all about joy here on the Midland Money Mindset, right? And we ask each of our guests the same final question. I'm going to ask you now, Hannah. What did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
I did what I do every morning, which really is joyful to me, which is I hug my daughters and then I go for a walk and get a coffee. So I
Sounds great.
arrive at my desk having had some exercise and with a coffee. And the sunshine and just being in nature a little bit, I think it really puts me in a frame of mind to feel appreciative about who I get to serve and what I get to do.
Sounds like a great way to kick off the day. And Hannah, we're going to have all of your information in the show notes, as I mentioned, and we'll have those resources that we mentioned as well. But if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, see the book, Taxes for Humans, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Sure. You can just go to my website, sunlighttax.com, and everything that I talked about today is at that website. So Sunlight Tax is my company. Sunlighttax.com is where you can find me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hannah. I appreciate you. Thanks for taking out the time to share with our listeners, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.
Hannah, thank you for bringing such light and clarity to a topic so many people fear. Your passion for helping creators and entrepreneurs find confidence in their finances is inspiring. You remind us that money and even taxes can be tools for purpose, impact, and joy. It's been a true pleasure having you on the Midland Money Mindset. Hannah Cole and all she is up to can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes.